Have you ever been told you are worthless by the very people sworn to protect you? On the coldest night of 1482, one outcast Omega defied 3 entire werewolf packs, carrying a crippled pup 10 miles through a deadly blizzard. This is a story of betrayal, blood, and unimaginable survival. The winter of 1482 did not arrive with a gentle snowfall. It slammed into the Oakhaven Valley like a physical blow, freezing rivers overnight and burying the timber-framed longhouses in relentless, suffocating white. Inside the great hall of the Redridge Pack, the massive hearth roared, casting long, flickering shadows against the stone walls. Yet for Maeve, the fire offered no warmth. Maeve knelt on the rough-hewn floorboards, her knees aching from the cold draught that seeped beneath the heavy oak doors. In her arms, wrapped tightly in a frayed, moth-eaten wool blanket, lay little Toby. He was barely 3 months old, his breathing shallow and rattling. But it wasn't the winter sickness that had sealed his fate. It was his right hind leg. Twisted at a grotesque angle since birth, the limb was paralyzed, rendering him incapable of ever hunting, fighting, or contributing to the pack. In the ruthless hierarchy of medieval werewolf society, a wolf who could not run was a wolf who should not live. The law of the ancestors is absolute, Maeve, boomed Alpha Cedric. He sat upon his carved wooden chair, a massive man draped in heavy bear furs, his eyes as unforgiving as the blizzard raging outside. The weak are culled so the strong may survive. We barely have enough elk meat to feed our warriors. We cannot waste rations on a defective pup. He is a burden. He is a child, Cedric. Maeve pleaded, her voice cracking. She wasn't an alpha, nor a beta. She was a lowly omega, the pack's scapegoat and servant, born to a disgraced bloodline. But she was the only one who had stepped forward when Toby's biological mother, Beatrice, had left him in the snow to freeze just hours after his birth. Beatrice stood near the alpha now, her posture rigid, her face an unreadable mask of ice. Beside her stood Jonathan Thatcher, the pack's respected healer, who purposefully looked down at his boots, refusing to meet Maeve's desperate gaze. "He is a liability," Cedric corrected harshly. "And you, Maeve, have defied a direct order by bringing him back inside the gates. You have challenged my authority in front of the council. I am begging you," Maeve whispered, tears hot and stinging against her dirt-smudged cheeks. She pulled Toby closer to her chest. The pup let out a weak, pathetic whimper, burying his tiny, feverish face into her neck. "Give us scraps. I will get him my own rations. He doesn't need to hunt. He can mend clothes. He can forage when he's older. Enough!" Cedric's fist slammed onto the wooden table, the sound echoing like a thunderclap through the silent hall. "You wish to mother the useless? Then you shall share his fate. You are stripped of your pack scent. You are stripped of your title. You are banished from Redridge. Take the crippled rat and walk into the snow. If I see either of you within our borders by sunrise, the guards will shoot you on sight." A collective gasp rippled through the gathered pack members, but no one stepped forward. No one challenged the alpha. To be banished in a blizzard of this magnitude was a death sentence. It was cowardice masked as tradition. Cedric didn't want the blood on his own hands, so he was letting the winter do the killing. Maeve looked at the faces of the people she had known her entire life. She saw pity in a few eyes, but mostly she saw fear and disgust. She swallowed the massive lump in her throat, her spine straightening with a sudden fierce pride that defied her omega status. She didn't say another word. She didn't beg again. Pulling the thin blanket securely over Toby's head to shield him from the wind, Maeve pushed herself up from the floor. She turned her back on the blazing fire, on Beatrice, and on Alpha Cedric. As the heavy iron-wrought doors were pulled open by the guards, the howling wind immediately ripped the warmth from her body. Stepping out into the biting, blinding snow, Maeve felt the pack bond snap, a sharp, physical pain in her chest that left her gasping. She was packless, a rogue, but as she looked down at the tiny bundle shivering against her heart, A fierce, primal instinct ignited within her. "I've got you, Toby," she whispered into the raging wind. "I'm going to get you out of here." The first 3 miles were a blur of white agony. The snow was already up to Maeve's thighs, and every step required monumental effort. The wind howled like a choir of banshees, driving ice crystals into her exposed skin like shards of glass. She couldn't shift into her wolf form. Her wolf was too small to carry the pup safely in her jaws through the deep drifts without suffocating him. She had to stay human, relying on her meager boots and a thin woolen cloak. Her destination was the Ironfell Pack, located 4 miles to the east across the jagged gorge. Ironfell was known to be a wealthy, militaristic pack. They had iron mines, vast grain stores, and heavily fortified stone keeps. Maeve knew the chances were slim, but she hoped their abundance might make them more merciful than the starving Redridge. Hours bled into one another. Her toes went completely numb, the terrifying pain of the cold slowly giving way to a dangerous, lethargic warmth. She kept herself awake by talking to the shivering lump in her arms, telling Toby stories of the summer sun, of running through fields of wildflowers, of a world that wasn't trying to freeze them alive. Just past midnight, the towering stone gates of Ironfell materialized through the blinding squall. Maeve collapsed against the heavy timber doors, pounding on them with her free, frost-bitten hand. "Please!" she screamed, her voice barely a croak over the wind. "Open the gates. We are freezing." Above her, torches flared. 2 sentries, broad-shouldered men named Thomas and Rickard, peered over the battlements. Seeing a lone, half-frozen woman, they reluctantly hauled the heavy iron chains, opening a small side door. Maeve stumbled into the courtyard, instantly surrounded by the menacing growls of Ironfell warriors. She was dragged by her arms, Toby still clutched desperately to her chest, into the secondary keep, thrown onto the stone floor before a massive roaring fireplace. The sudden heat was agonizing to her frozen skin. "What is this trash the wind blew in?" a deep, resonant voice asked. Maeve forced her head up, her vision blurring. Stepping down from a raised dais was Garrett, the Alpha of Ironfell. He was a terrifyingly handsome man with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of storm clouds. Beside him stood his beta, Gideon Hale, a man known throughout the territories for his ruthless cruelty. As Garrett stepped closer, looking down at the shivering snow-covered Omega, something unprecedented happened. The heavy scent of pine, wet earth, and sweet cedar hit Maeve's senses, cutting through the smell of wet wool and smoke. Her wolf, previously dormant and shivering within her mind, suddenly stood at attention, howling. Garrett froze mid-step. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the stormy gray of his irises. The air in the room seemed to crackle with an invisible electric tension. The mate bond, the most sacred, unbreakable law of the goddess. The wealthy, powerful Alpha of Ironfell was the fated mate to a banished, starving Omega. Maeve felt a sudden, euphoric rush of hope. The goddess had not abandoned her. Her mate was an Alpha. He would protect her. He would save Toby. "Mate," Maeve breathed, the word tumbling from her cracked lips like a prayer. A hushed silence fell over the room. The guards exchanged bewildered glances. Gideon Hale scoffed loudly, stepping forward. "A trick. She is a rogue, Omega, Garrett. She reeks of weakness." Garrett stood entirely still, staring down at Maeve. The internal war playing out on his face was agonizing to watch. He saw the bond. He felt it. But then his gaze drifted downward, landing on the bundle in Maeve's arms. Toby shifted, exposing his twisted, deformed leg. Garrett's jaw clenched. The romantic tales sang of alphas who surrendered everything for their mates, but the reality of 15th century pack politics was far uglier. To accept a packless, disgraced Omega carrying a crippled, dying pup from a rival pack would make him a laughingstock. It would show weakness to his brutal beta and his bloodthirsty warriors. Slowly the warmth drained from Garrett's eyes, replaced by a calculating political frost that was colder than the blizzard outside. "I have no meat," Garrett lied, his voice echoing loudly off the stone walls. Maeve's heart stopped. "Garrett, please. I can feel it. You can feel it. Look at me." "Now, I am looking at a beggar," Garrett sneered, though Maeve could see the vein pulsing violently in his neck, betraying the agony of rejecting the bond. "You trespass on Ironfell lands with a diseased runt. You bring the stench of failure into my keep." "I don't need a place at your table," Maeve begged, crawling forward on her knees, leaving a trail of melted snow and blood from her raw skin. "Just let him stay by the fire for the night. Let the pup survive the storm. Tomorrow I will leave and you will never see me again. I swear it." Gideon Hale laughed, drawing a steel dagger from his belt. "Let me gut the defective thing, Alpha. It will save her the trouble of carrying it." Garrett held up a hand, stopping Gideon. He looked down at Maeve, his expression hardening into stone to protect his pride. "Ironfell is not a charity ward for the refuse of Redridge. Throw them back into the storm. Buck." "No!" Maeve screamed as Thomas and Rickard grabbed her roughly by the shoulders, hauling her to her feet. "Garrett, you are killing us. You are killing your own mate. Throw her out." Garrett roared, turning his back to her, unable to watch. The guards dragged her back through the courtyard. She fought like a wildcat, kicking and screaming, but she was weak and outmatched. They shoved her violently through the iron gates, and the heavy doors slammed shut with a definitive hollow boom. Maeve collapsed into a snowbank, the agonizing pain of a rejected mate bond ripping through her chest like a physical blade. She dry-heaved into the snow, coughing up a spatter of blood. She was completely alone. Her old pack had discarded her. Her fated mate had betrayed her to save his own ego. The storm was intensifying, the snow falling so thick she couldn't see her own hands. She looked down at Toby. The pup's eyes were closed, his breathing terrifyingly shallow. He was slipping away. Tears froze to Maeve's eyelashes. She could just lie down. It would be so easy to close her eyes and let the winter take them both. It would be a painless, quiet end to a life of misery. But then she remembered the rumors. 6 miles to the north, across the treacherous, howling peaks, lay the sanctuary of Silverpine Monastery of exiled wolves, said to take in any soul, no matter how broken. 6 miles of vertical climbing through a blizzard. It was impossible. Maeve gritted her teeth, wiping the blood from her mouth. The betrayal of her mate had burned away her despair, leaving behind a cold, burning fury. She wrapped the blanket tighter around Toby, tying it securely to her chest with a torn strip of her tunic. "We aren't dying today, little one," she hissed into the wind, her eyes locking onto the dark, looming silhouette of the northern mountains. "Let them all burn in hell." With bleeding hands and frozen feet, the Omega began to climb. The ascent into the howling peaks was not merely a climb, it was a descent into a frozen hell. By the time Maeve reached the tree line, the world had been reduced to a violent sensory void of shrieking wind and blinding white. Her boots, originally thin and worn, were now frozen solid, her feet completely numb, blocks of ice. The 6 miles to Silverpine were entirely vertical, winding through treacherous ravines and narrow ledges where a single misstep meant a fatal plunge into the abyss. Inside the tight bindings against her chest, Toby had gone terrifyingly silent. The pup's earlier whimpers had ceased, replaced by a frightening stillness. Maeve kept one hand pressed firmly against his back, feeling for the faint, fluttering rhythm of his heart. It was there, weak, erratic, but there. "Stay with me, Toby," she rasped, her voice immediately snatched away by the gale. Her throat felt lined with shattered glass. "Do not let them win. Do not let that coward Garrett be right." Hadabad, so bone. So She had climbed for what felt like hours, using her bare, bleeding fingers to find purchase on the icy rocks, when a new sound pierced the storm. It wasn't the wind. It was the crunch of heavy boots on packed snow. Maeve froze, pressing herself against the sheer cliff wall. She peered through the driving snow. A massive silhouette was tracking her path, moving with the predatory grace of a seasoned warrior. As the figure drew closer, the faint light of the moon caught a glint of drawn steel. It was Gideon Hale, the brutal beta of Ironfell. Garrett hadn't just rejected her. He had sent his executioner to tie up the loose ends. A rejected mate bond was a psychological poison to an alpha. It would slowly drive Garrett mad with guilt and longing. Unless the mate was dead, Gideon, ever the ruthless pragmatist, had taken it upon himself to ensure his alpha remained focused and unburdened. End of the line, little Omega. Gideon's voice boomed, laced with malicious amusement. He stood 10 yards below her on the narrow trail, twirling a long, serrated hunting knife. I must admit you made it farther than I expected. But this is where the tragedy ends. Hand over the crippled runt, and I promise your death will be quick. Fight me, and I'll make you watch while I skin it. A cold terror washed over Maeve, but it was instantly incinerated by a mother's volcanic rage. The pack hierarchy, her Omega status, her physical exhaustion had all evaporated. She gently shifted Toby's weight, tying the makeshift sling tighter behind her neck, freeing both of her arms. You will not touch him, Maeve snarled, her voice dropping an octave, resonating with a feral, primal vibration she had never felt before. Gideon laughed, a harsh, grating sound. You're a starving, packless Omega, Maeve. You have no strength left. He lunged up the incline. He was fast, driven by a lifetime of combat training. But Gideon had underestimated 2 things, the treacherous ice covering the ledge and the desperate, cornered fury of a woman protecting a child. As Gideon thrust the blade toward her abdomen, Maeve didn't retreat. She threw herself forward inside his guard. She grabbed his knife arm with both hands, using his own upward momentum against him. Her teeth bared, she sank her fangs deep into the junction of his neck and shoulder, right through his heavy leather armor. Gideon roared in pain and shock, dropping the knife. He struck her hard across the face with his free hand, a blow that shattered her nose and sent stars bursting across her vision. The force sent Maeve stumbling backward, sliding toward the edge of the ravine. Filthy bitch, Gideon spat, clutching his bleeding neck. He advanced on her, his eyes murderous. I'm going to rip you apart. Maeve tasted her own blood, warm and metallic, sliding down her throat. She looked at Gideon, then glanced at the ground directly above him. A massive, jagged outcropping of ice and loose shale hung precariously on the cliff face, destabilized by the storm. She had no weapons, she had no strength, but she had the mountain. With a defiant scream, Maeve kicked out not at Gideon but at the heavy dead trunk of an uprooted pine tree wedged against the outcropping. Her foot connected with a sickening crack of bone, but the trunk shifted. The leverage was enough. A sharp, booming crack echoed through the ravine louder than thunder. Gideon looked up, his eyes widening in sudden, pure terror. No. Tons of solid ice, snow, and jagged rock detached from the cliff face. It came down like a white tidal wave. Maeve pressed herself flat against the inner wall, shielding Toby with her own body as the avalanche roared past them. Gideon's scream was abruptly cut short, silenced by the crushing weight of the mountain, as the avalanche swept him off the ledge and into the black void below. Silence returned, save for the wind. Maeve lay in the snow for a long time, her chest heaving, her broken nose throbbing with agonizing intensity. She had killed a beta warrior. An Omega had killed a beta. Shakily, she forced herself to her feet. The trail ahead was gone, buried under the debris. She would have to free climb the final 2 miles. Her vision was tunneling, her limbs felt like lead, but the faint, rhythmic beating of Toby's heart against her chest drove her upward, one bloody handhold at a time. It was dawn when Maeve finally reached the summit. The storm had broken, revealing a breathtaking, cruel sky of piercing blue. Before her, nestled in a sheltered plateau surrounded by ancient, towering pines, stood the heavy iron gates of the Silver Pine Monastery. She took 3 steps toward the gate before her legs finally gave out. The world tilted, spun, and faded to black. Her last conscious thought was the sensation of strong, gentle hands lifting her from the snow, and the smell of frankincense and burning cedar. When Maeve opened her eyes, she was enveloped in warmth. She was lying on a thick feather bed in a stone room lit by sunlight. Her hands and feet were bandaged with pungent herbal salves. "You have been asleep for 3 days," a deep, calming voice said. Sitting beside her bed was an older man with silver hair and a face heavily mapped with scars. He wore the simple spun wool of a monk, but the aura radiating from him was undeniably that of an alpha. A true ancient alpha. Maeve shot up, ignoring the screaming pain in her ribs. "Toby, the pup." "Shut, peace, child," the man said, gently pushing her back down. "The boy is alive. He is sleeping by the hearth in the next room. My name is Nathaniel. I am the caretaker of Silverpine. You have done the impossible, Maeve. You carried that child 10 miles through the worst blizzard of the century." Tears, hot and fast, spilled down Maeve's cheeks. "They said he was worthless. My old alpha. My mate." "I know the stench of Ironfell and Redridge," Nathaniel said softly, his eyes filled with profound sorrow. "Here at Silverpine we do not worship physical perfection. We worship the strength of the spirit. A broken leg does not make a broken wolf. You are safe here. Both of you." 5 years later, winter of 1487. The years that followed were harsh on the valley below, but kind to Silverpine. A terrible blight had swept through the lowlands, decimating the elk herds and bringing famine to the proud packs. Inside the bustling courtyard of Silverpine, Maeve stood reviewing a ledger of grain stores. She was no longer a hunched, dirt-smudged omega. She wore a fine tunic of dyed blue wool, her hair braided with silver beads, standing tall and radiant. She was the head quartermaster of the sanctuary, second only to Nathaniel. "Mother, look." Maeve turned and smiled warmly. Bounding across the courtyard was a 5-year-old Toby. He didn't run like the other pups, but he moved with incredible speed and agility. Strapped to his right hind leg was an intricate, articulated brace made of lightweight ironwood and leather, a masterpiece engineered by Arthur, the sanctuary's blacksmith, under Toby's own brilliant direction. Toby couldn't fight in the traditional sense, but his mind was a steel trap. He was already reading ancient maps and plotting trade routes that kept Silverpine thriving while the rest of the world starved. Suddenly the heavy monastery bell tolled. Visitors at the gate. Maeve walked to the battlements, looking down. What she saw made her blood run cold, then boil. Standing in the snow were a dozen emaciated, shivering wolves. Leading them was a man who looked like a ghost. His hair was matted, his aristocratic face gaunt and hollow, his eyes sunken with dark, bruised circles. He looked 30 years older. It was Garrett, Alpha of Ironfell. The decay of the rejected mate bond had ravaged him. Without his mate, his soul had withered, leading to paranoia, terrible leadership, and the slow ruin of his pack. Beside him stood a few surviving warriors from Redridge. Beatrice, Toby's biological mother, was among them, looking desperate and starved. Cedric, it seemed, had not survived the famines. "Open the gates," Garrett rasped, looking up at the battlements, coughing violently. "We seek parley. We seek parley. We are starving. I am Alpha Garrett. I know who you are." Maeve's voice rang out, clear and commanding, carrying over the wind. Garrett froze. He slowly looked up, his clouded, sunken eyes locking onto the woman standing on the wall. The scent hid him, pine, wet earth, and cedar, but it was no longer seeking him. It was closed off, heavily guarded, and completely autonomous. "Maeve, Garrett whispered, falling to his knees in the snow. The sheer shock of seeing her alive, glowing with health and power, broke whatever fragile sanity he had left. "Mate, you're alive." Beatrice stepped forward, her eyes widening in disbelief as she looked past Maeve to see the young, healthy boy with the wooden brace standing proudly at his mother's side. "Toby," the pup she had discarded. "We are dying," Garrett pleaded, tears streaming down his hollow cheeks, reaching his trembling hands up toward the wall. "My pack is broken. I was wrong, Maeve. The goddess punished me. I am empty without you. Please, claim me. Come back to me." Maeve looked down at the man who had thrown her to the wolves, the man who had sent his beta to slaughter her and her child to protect his pride. She felt no pull of the bond. The fire she had walked through had burned the tether completely away. "You are not my mate, Garrett," Maeve said, a voice devoid of anger, echoing with a chilling, absolute finality. "My mate died 5 years ago in the courtyard of Ironfell. You are just a stranger begging at my gates." "Maeve, please," Beatrice cried out from the crowd. "Toby, he is my blood. We are family." Toby stepped up to the edge of the battlement, looking down at the woman who had birthed him. His eyes held wisdom far beyond his 5 years. "My mother carried me up a mountain while you sat by a fire, Beatrice. I have no blood in the valley." Maeve placed a protective hand on Toby's shoulder, looking back down at the starving remnants of the packs that had discarded them. "Silverpine does not turn away the starving," Maeve announced, her tone shifting to that of an authoritative leader. "We will give you grain, and we will give you blankets. But you will not cross these gates. You will set up camp in the lower valley, and you will work the fields to repay your debt. Here your alpha titles mean nothing. Here you are alive only by the grace of the Omegas and the cripples you once condemned." Garrett sobbed, his head bowing into the snow, completely broken by the weight of his own arrogance and the irretrievable loss of the woman he was destined to love. Maeve turned her back on the pleading alpha and the weeping mother. She didn't need a pack to define her worth. She had forged her own destiny in the ice, and she had won. Taking Toby by the hand, the fiercely independent Omega walked back into the warmth of her true home, leaving the ghosts of her past to freeze in the cold reality of their own making. The strength of a wolf isn't measured by the sharpness of their fangs, but by the depth of their devotion. Maeve proved that a mother's love can conquer mountains and bring alphas to their knees. If this story of brutal survival, karma, and ultimate revenge gave you chills, hit that like button, share this video with your pack, and subscribe for more epic real-life fantasy dramas.